Hello to all Cinemaster lovers. Hope you enjoy watching. Let's get started. A young man pretends to be mentally ill to enter the mental institution where his sister is, but he discovers that the institution's director is preparing a serum that turns humans into zombies. Our film begins with a young man named Jack writing a letter explaining his intentions. In the letter's introduction, he tells us that his sister has been suffering from psychological disorders since their mother's death and has attempted suicide multiple times, but Jack saved her at the last moment each time. So, Jack decided to place his sister under the care of the family doctor, but he discovered that her condition was worsening over time, prompting the family doctor to transfer her to the mental institution. Visits were prohibited in that institution for a long time until Jack planned to appear insane to enter the institution and save his sister. After finishing the letter, he left it on the table in case he decided to confess the truth that he wasn't insane to leave the institution afterward. Jack began to harm himself and cut his hair. He went out to the street with his body covered in blood, pretending to be insane, started hitting people and saying strange things, making people believe he was crazy. The police tried to control Jack, and an ambulance was called to take him to the city's mental institution. There was a guard at the institution named Charles, who took Jack from the ambulance, sedated him, and handed him over to Dr. Yannetti, who was in charge of the entire institution. When they saw Yannetti, he told them to put him under maximum observation. Charles took Jack to the observation room, where we saw many insane people under surveillance. Charles placed Jack in a room and, before leaving, introduced him to the man in front of him, named Mark, who was infamous for murdering a large group of girls and keeping their bodies in his home freezer, raping them every day for a week until he was caught. When Charles left, he noticed Mark vomiting blood from his mouth, so he took him to his room. But Jack noticed that Mark was carrying a weapon and began to threaten Charles. Before he could finish him off, Jack warned Charles, causing him to flee. Afterward, Mark cursed Jack for warning Charles and ruining his plan. So all the insane people started cursing Jack as well. The next day, Yannetti saw Jack's condition again and decided to take him out of observation, so Charles took him to the psychiatric room to start treatment. At that time, Yannetti entered Mark's room and told him that if his behavior didn't improve, he wouldn't give him the serum called Warfie. Yannetti placed his hand on Mark's head, and we found that Mark was very calm. We returned to Jack, who was greeted by a nurse named Nancy, who asked him to wait in a place for a minute while she went to complete his paperwork. Jack began looking around, approached the patients, and went to a patient who gave him a paper, but she suddenly screamed, saying he was trying to harass her. Nancy rushed to calm the patient quickly and took Jack to the second floor where the patient's rooms were to deliver him to his room. On the way, Nancy explained the rules to Jack, but suddenly a patient named Loomis attacked her, strangling her with the intention of ending her life, and Nancy's alarm device fell from her hand. Jack went to help her, and Yannetti and Charles arrived, with Charles electrocuting Loomis and subsequently moving Nancy. Nancy took Jack to the room where he would sleep and asked her to leave him because he was tired and wanted to sleep. After Nancy left, Jack quickly got up and saw the window in the room, trying to open it, but suddenly heard a sound coming from the closet. He opened the closet and found a person named David, who asked him what he was doing there. David told him he was making sure he wasn't one of Dr. Yannetti's victims, and that his eye wasn't white. Jack was initially puzzled by his words, but David explained that Mark's white eyes weren't natural, all because of the Warfie serum. David made Jack look at the ceiling and showed him an unstable light that flickered on and off. This continued, and they were experimenting on patients by giving them the serum to ensure its success. But what happened to the patients as a result of these experiments varied. We saw Dr. Yannetti in the laboratory above them, electrocuting Loomis until foam came out of his mouth. Vera, Yannetti's assistant, stopped the electricity generator because Loomis was about to lose his life, and Yannetti told her he understood what he was doing well and instructed her to prepare to electrocute Loomis again and give him the serum. Vera refused, angering Yannetti, who told her the benefits of the serum and that it would heal all patients' brains, but she didn't agree. Loomis's eyes began to turn white, as David had said. The next day, Jack found his sister and approached her. His sister, named Lily, began talking to him angrily because she was in a bad state and told him she was sick and would remain sick like their mother. Lily screamed in his face and didn't give him a chance to speak. The nurse came and took her to her room. We saw a patient named Heather, who witnessed everything happening between them and was impressed by Jack. Jack went to get food to eat and hid a spoon in his pocket. Heather approached him and asked if he knew or loved Lily, but he ignored her. She offered him to come to her room at night, but he didn't care and continued walking. Jack went to sit with David, and Charles came to sit beside them, talking to David about a deal between them to steal the drugs and bring them to him without anyone knowing. Afterward, Charles left, and David asked Jack not to tell anyone what he heard, promising to respect Jack's madness. That night, we saw Charles exploiting Heather and raping her. During those times, Jack was trying to use the spoon to cut a piece of his bed. During the day, he tried using that piece to open the window, but unfortunately, he didn't succeed and injured his finger, not knowing how to treat it. He went to group therapy with his injured finger and talked to them about his mother's illness and how she died, but he didn't see the blood dripping from his finger onto the floor. Loomis saw the blood and focused on it, rushing towards Jack's finger to bite it. We saw another patient licking the blood off the floor, and chaos ensued. Unfortunately, things got out of hand, but Charles intervened and stopped everything, electrocuting Loomis. David and Jack began talking together and realized that Loomis was focused on blood, and they understood that the Werfe serum was not just a treatment but something much more dangerous. After that, Jack decided to meet Dr. Yannetti and asked him to bring the letter he had left in his apartment, the letter he left in case he wanted to leave. After bringing it, Jack discovered it wasn't the letter he wrote. It was a blank letter with only one word. Jack became very angry and told them they were playing him and that they weren't wanting to let him out. So Yannetti had Charles take him back to maximum surveillance, and Jack tried to hit Charles but couldn't push him away. When they reached the surveillance room, all the patients kept shouting at Jack, and Jack was put in the same room he was in before. Mark started reminding him that he would take an injection from him, and that it was he who ruined his plan. After a while, Jack felt he was truly mentally ill and felt he should stay in this place until he was treated. Yannetti came to him with Charles, and Jack apologized to them for what he did. When Yannetti left the surveillance, we see Jack sitting with David, asking him to teach him how to hide at night like he does when stealing medicines because he wants to get the Werfe serum and make sure it's not dangerous. But of course, David refused. That same day, at night, Jack left his room to try to steal the serum himself, but suddenly David appeared and told him he would help him, but he would teach him how to hide without going with him to Dr. Yannetti's lab. The two began to move, but they tried to hide as much as possible, because if Charles saw them, no good would come of it. They entered a room and David began stealing the required medicine, and Jack understood what he was doing and took a card from the desk that could open doors. At that time, we see Charles outside the room they were in, and he entered, but they managed to hide quickly. Charles kept looking around but found no one and left. The two also escaped. We see Jack opening a door to go up to the floor where the lab is and managing to pass the cameras without Charles noticing him. Jack managed to reach the floor where the solitary confinement for patients was, and he looked through all the windows, searching for Lily, and indeed managed to find her. Lily kept apologizing to him for yelling at him, and asked him to get her out quickly because she saw what was happening in the nearby rooms with experiments like on mice. At that time, Jack heard Charles's voice, so he quickly hid and told his sister he would return for her. Jack ran away, entered many corridors, and also entered the maximum surveillance room, managing to bypass all of that because of the card he had, and managed to reach the doctor's lab. He found an iron cage and approached it, and suddenly Loomis attacked him from inside the cage. Jack quickly prepared himself and managed to take a small capsule containing the serum, and took a small scalpel to defend himself. He used his hearing to know that Dr. Yannetti and Vera were coming. Vera told Yannetti that the serum was spreading rapidly in the patients' bodies, but suddenly the doctor grabbed her and wrote something, discovering that the serum was developing in a way only he knew, reaching the extent of its impact. He discovered that he needed to know that the serum would be very dangerous and needed to stop it, but he didn't care about her. He felt hatred, grabbed a sharp scalpel and cut part of her leg, causing her to bleed, enjoying seeing the blood, and continued, asking her to see a way to control the serum. After he left, Vera brought her hands close to Loomis while bleeding, continuing to bleed into the next day. Jack tried to stay away from Heather, but she tried to approach him so he could get away. He went to talk to David and showed him the serum capsule, but suddenly, a nurse asked him to show her his hand. So he hid the serum and gave her his hand, and she marked him as allowed to go out in the sun. Jack and David went out into the sun in the yard, and Jack asked David to steal the keys to the solitary confinement rooms because Lily was locked in there and needed to be freed. But suddenly, one of the patients came to them, and his eyes clearly showed he had taken the serum, and with this patient was a cat, and suddenly he separated the cat's head from its body. Chaos ensued in the place, and all the patients gathered around the cat, eating like zombies. David and Jack tried to escape, and the man who cut the cat's head attacked Jack and tried to get past him. But Charles arrived and stopped everything that was happening, and Jack was moved. Jack dreamed of nightmares about very terrifying things. His mother and his sister trying to end her life until he woke up and ran to the room where Nurse Nancy was, screaming at her and asking to see Lily. Suddenly, the second nurse told him she was with Dr. Yannetti and that it was impossible for him to do anything to harm her. But he became very angry and demanded to see his sister immediately. He looked into the nurse's eyes and found traces of the serum in them, confronting her, but the nurse denied everything, telling him it was just a bite from Loomis and its effects. Nancy took him back to his room and asked him to wait and not go out. Nancy left and closed the door, and he sat until night. David came in and told him he managed to steal the keys from Charles and had put him to sleep. They quickly went to the stairs to go up to the second floor. At that time, we see Lily tied up in Yanetti's lab, about to receive the serum. Vera was the one tying her up. After tying her up, Vera went to feed Loomis, but her stick fell inside the cage, and she reached in to get it. Suddenly, Loomis grabbed her, and Vera tried to push him, but Loomis broke her hands and, unfortunately, cut her hands off her body. When Lily saw this, she screamed and asked for someone to help them. Vera dealt cleverly with the wound and tied it with cloth until the doctor entered the lab. He was annoyed with Vera and didn't care about what happened to her, but went to take her to another room and put her in a bed to treat her, taking a blood sample from her arm to ensure the serum had spread to every area. When he confirmed it, he was very happy with the serum's success. After that, he quickly went to look for Charles because he felt something wrong was happening, but he couldn't find Charles anywhere. He looked at the cameras and found David and Jack, so Yannetti kept calling Charles on the radio, but to no avail. We see Charles sleeping in the room with Heather, and Heather hid the radio before Charles woke up. At that time, Jack and David passed by the maximum surveillance room again, and Jack offered help in exchange for freeing them, but Jack refused. At that time, a nurse entered Vera to check on her condition if it was stable. At that time, with Yannetti, he was at the electricity control panel and destroyed it, causing the power to go out in the entire hospital so no one could escape. The problem now was that the patients in the surveillance room, their room doors opened, and they all got out. The problem was that Jack and David were still in that surveillance room. They encountered the patients, and David opened the door, and they escaped far from those patients. The patients followed them, staying behind them until Jack and David managed to reach the lab where Lily was. They entered and closed the door on the zombies outside, and Jack found his sister, quickly going to untie her, and Lily told him she hadn't taken the serum yet, reassuring her brother that she was still okay. They took when they escaped from the hospital entirely. At that time, we return to the nurse, and Vera tries to treat her wound, but suddenly she bites the wound and eats Vera's hand joyfully. We return to Jack, David, and Lily as they try to find a place they can escape from the hospital, to the room where the patients who were under surveillance were, and they find no one of them and think they ended up on each other. And when they go to open the door, they find it blocked. And Jack tells his friends it's a trap, and it turns out to be a trap. We find that the patients were hiding in the ceiling and descending from it, so Jack goes out with Lily, and David protects him until he tries to open the door. David starts cutting the wires of the elevator door, seeing which wire can open the door, and David and Lily prefer to protect him and hit the patients who turned into zombies and want to eat him. But when one of them bleeds, they eat him and forget what they were doing due to the instinct that became with them. But suddenly, Mark reached Lily and pulled her by her leg, and he was about to lose her. But her brother Jack got up and hit him and managed to save his sister. But the rest of the patients gathered on him and were about to get rid of him. But the group pushed on each other and managed to open the elevator door. They would escape to the ground floor. They managed to enter the elevator, and before the door closed, Marco opened it and was about to get rid of them. So Jack stabbed him with the scalpel he took from the lab and made sure he would die, then closed the elevator door, and they went down to the ground floor and got out of the elevator. Jack destroyed the elevator control device so no one would come down after them, and then asked David to protect his sister until he did something. Jack saw walking behind a sound source he heard until he reached a room door, and it turned out to be Heather's room, so he tried to escape, and Heather came after him, and another group of patients turned into zombies appeared on him, and he hit her and hit Heather as well, and he ran out and returned to David and Lily, and he took them and ran to the reception room and locked the door. Suddenly, they found a chair swaying on the glass, and it turned out to be Nancy, who was hiding, and Nancy knew they weren't transformed, so she took them and went to the kitchen so they could get knives to defend themselves. But after they found some knives, one of the transformed ones jumped on Jack and was about to get rid of him, but David and the rest managed to get rid of this transformed one before he got rid of their friend. But unfortunately, a very large group of transformed patients reached them, and a big battle occurred between them so Jack and the rest of the group could reach the back door of the kitchen and lock the transformed ones. They climbed the stairs until they reached the office and saw any mobile they could call for help, but suddenly they found the nanny who was biting Vera in front of them, and all the nanny was covered in blood. They told her about Yannetti's location, and the nanny told them he was looking for a solution to everything happening. But the problem now was that this nanny shouted at Nancy because she was supposed to be the ward guard, and she had no right to leave her guard, so Nancy stabbed her with a knife in her stomach, and she fell to the ground. Nancy told them that Yannetti had a gun in his office they could use to defend themselves, so they all went to the office until they reached it. David took a sword hanging on the wall, and Jack took the gun and also found the original letter he wrote in the desk drawer. After that, they left the office and found blood, so they followed it until suddenly the nanny that Nancy stabbed attacked her, and she was about to get rid of her, but Lily hit her with a stick and got rid of the nanny. They continued on their way until they reached the room where Vera was, and they asked her about a place to escape from, and Vera told them there was a secret way in the lab they could escape from, And they could also use the ventilation ducts instead of the stairs, so the transformed ones wouldn't get rid of them. They decided to walk and leave her, but Vera stopped them and asked them to get rid of her with the injection instead of her turning too. Nancy injected her with an injection and got rid of her, and they started moving again and looking for the ventilation ducts Vera mentioned. Nancy opened a door but was shocked when she found the cleaning lady transformed and attacked her, so Jack quickly shot her. But the shock was when he reassured Nancy. He found she died because the transformed one bit her in a dangerous area. At this time, David and Lily managed to find the ventilation duct and called on Jack. So Jack converted the transformed ones until they passed, and he continued shooting the transformed ones until Heather appeared in front of him. And he was about to shoot her, but he found that the bullets had run out, so he kicked her and ran out and entered the ventilation duct. Heather stayed behind him and held onto his leg, but Jack hit her and managed to throw her from a high place in the ventilation ducts and got rid of her. The road the group was passing through was behind them, all transformed ones trying to bite them until Jack, David, and Lily managed to find the cleaning room window and pass through it, locked it, and went out again to the same surveillance room and found that the patients had finished on themselves. What no one expected was that Mark was still alive and standing in their way, and Jack knew he still intended to get rid of him. And Mark jumped on Jack with the scalpel to get rid of him. So Lily pushed her brother and got rid of Mark. After that, they reached Dr. Yanetti's lab and found Loomis still in the cage and didn't care about him. And Jack and Lily managed to find the secret way Vera mentioned. Suddenly, Yanetti appeared from behind David and grabbed him, and Yanetti put a long needle in David's eye nerves, and they knew this was healthy and wouldn't kill him. And it appeared that the doctor had gone mad. When he removed the needle, David fell dead on the ground, and we saw that David wasn't moving and had died. Jack tried to hit Yanetti, but Yanetti hit him with a big flashlight, and Yanetti grabbed him and tried to put the needle in his eye nerves too, but Lily defended her brother, and the two managed to hit Yanetti, but Yanetti stabbed Jack with the needle in his leg, so Jack was in pain, and Yanetti moved away from him. The electric shock was difficult, and Yanetti showed awareness when he woke up, and we saw that he was tied in Loomis's cage. Loomis started eating him, and Lily and Jack ran out of the secret way, and they managed to get out of it to the building's roof, and they managed to get down outside the hospital. Unfortunately, the serum capsule Jack was hiding with him broke. After Jack and his sister got out to the street, they found a police car, and the officers took him with them, and they were happy they would return to their homes. But the shock was that the officers took him back to the hospital. He knocked on the hospital door to know if anyone was there, but suddenly the door opened, and it turned out that Yanetti was still alive. Suddenly, the rest of the transformed ones came out and killed the officers, and they killed them. After killing the officers, they ran out into the streets and spread throughout the city, and we learned that the world would be destroyed and become like zombies, all because of Dr. Yanetti, who wanted to control his patients. And here, we have reached the end of our film.